I was about to say all the way from Las Vegas, but that's not true at all. All the way from Reno.
Right.
I think everybody in Canada, when we think of Nevada, we imagine it's Las Vegas and like nothing. But there's a whole lot more to the state. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Cameron. Appreciate it.
So, most worshipful Brother Rick Graver, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Nevada, met you at the Grand Lodge of California,
Yes.
um, which was a terrific time, and I was very impressed with that event and with that annual communication. The tagline was right together again, and it really did feel like Freemasonry throughout Canada and United States, knock on wood, is getting together once again. And I got the chance to meet yourself. So thank you so much again for being here. Were you at the Grand Lodge for all 3 days?
I was there for the whole thing. Yep. I skipped out a little bit toward the end of, I think, the business session. One of the days, like towards the end, there's a lot of, the Grand Masters have their own little area that they sit in, and it's and you're kind of, you sit there, you don't have a lot to do with their business, but it's always interesting to see what they do. But I think there was maybe with an hour left to go, I think I did skip out just a little bit early one day.
Nothing's wrong with that. That is just keeping with the long line of tradition.
Yeah.
I once this will probably get me in trouble, but I once skipped out of a Grand Lodge to go to a club of ill repute in Toronto called Zanzibar. So we've all. I'm sure you didn't do that. I'm just
Yeah.
saying
No.
we've all skipped out early now and then. But I am sad to say that I have never had the chance to speak to any Masons from Nevada, or attend any Masonic events in Nevada. And I guess I get to start right at the top with the Grand Master. So
Yeah.
let's start. I know every jurisdiction is has been dealing with the last 18 months or so differently. Some jurisdictions, I think most jurisdictions in the states have resumed in-person gatherings. In Ontario we haven't yet, but we probably will in November, some lodges. As the most worshipful Grand Master in Nevada, what's it been like, you know slowly but surely, resuming in-person meetings and just resuming Masonic meetings, lodges, Grand Lodges? What's it been like, the resuming process?
Well, the what's a little bit different, or at least for Nevada, is out the junior past Grandmaster Lou Castle from Nevada came in November. Would be 2 years ago, and everything was going along great until March. So he had actually started doing some of his Grandmaster's official visits, and I went down to Pahrump for one of his, and then the COVID thing started to kind of appear, and we did one in Winnemucca, and shortly after that, it was the governor shut everything down. So that was like all the casinos, everything just were completely shut down. And so Masonry shut down at that time. And for Lou's year, it was really unfortunate because it was ebbing and flowing. And so the governor was trying to, in our state, trying to figure out if there were counties that were doing better, he was letting them have different rules than other counties. And so all of a sudden the Grand Master had to kind of figure out, well, lodges maybe can meet in one county, but not in another. And it was just really confusing. So at the end of the day, by the time our Grand Lodge rolled around, which was a year ago in November, we were open with kind of like a mask mandate, kind of like really where we are right now. And so we had our Grand Lodge in Las Vegas when I was installed. And shortly after that Grand Lodge event, the governor came back and said, we need to stop again because the holidays were coming and we were starting to spike. And so as the Grand Master, I had to write an edict, basically prohibiting all Masonic activity. it's kind of like maybe where you guys are now. I don't know if that's how it's done, in Ontario. If you guys aren't meeting, if that's because of public policy or whether that's your Grand Master. But as the Grand Master of Masons in Nevada, I had to write an edict that said no Masonic activity, and that went on until our governor kind of released, or he relaxed some of the restrictions in February. And at that time, then we just adopted whatever our state mandates were. And so then the lodges started to slowly meet again at their own comfort level. So we let them decide, if the master of that lodge wasn't feeling like it was safe for him, or they didn't feel like they were, ready to, make sure that everybody would, had face masks and, hand sanitizer and stuff like that. The lodges could make their own decision. The majority of them slowly began to open, and some of them opted to keep their officers in place because we were completely shut down when we normally would have had our elections and our installations. So some lodges opted to keep their officers until what's coming up in like December, when we normally have our elections. Some lodges opted to have their elections and install their officers, and they started their year basically in March. So that's a little bit unique. The lodges decided what to do, and at that time, then I started to plan my calendar, because I had a full calendar planned. When I became Deputy Grand Master, I had a full calendar planned for all of my events. This was way before COVID. And so when COVID came, all of a sudden I had to look at my calendar, and basically I had to compress all of my events into 6 months instead of 12 months.
Yeah, I want to uh ask you about, well, you used the phrase, and this is something that I try to uh be careful about when over the last 18 months or so, right? You talked about your edict kind of suspending Masonic activity. But my assumption, and I could be wrong, is even though your in-person gatherings may have been suspended, um, and certainly, there's not going to be ritual work or things of that nature, right? I'm assuming there was still within the state Masonic activity, either virtual meetings or, maybe younger brethren calling and checking on older brethren who might be isolated, or, charitable events or donations.
Right.
Um, you know,
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, it was in-person Masonic, basically in-person Masonic activity. It was the meetings, and we did, as the Grand Master, I had 3 Zoom meetings. So I did a Zoom meeting for the whole state. In Nevada, we have a Grand Web Mason, and so his job is to help with anything related to tech or web or websites, our Nevada Masonic Facebook page or our Nevada Masonic website. And so he and I worked together, and we did a Zoom meeting in December, January, and February. So I guess I misspoke when I said prohibiting Masonic activity. It was in-person Masonic activity.
and did you see, or are you aware of, lodges or masons who, while the in-person activity was suspended, were lodges taking advantage of Zoom? Were lodges, calling each other? Did you see a lot of lodges trying to maintain some Masonic ties and connections um, during the 18, or however long it was that the activity was suspended?
I would say they were having activity, but it wasn't a formal Masonic activity. So that, brother, people are going to do what they want to do. If they're going to meet, they're going to go for coffee, or they're going to, they're going to do things. They'll be talking on the phone. I did attend a virtual installation during the year. So they had a Zoom meeting that was kind of a virtual installation. That was a little bit, that was interesting. And of course the 3 Zoom meetings that I had. So but it was fairly strict. I mean, the rule really was just stop for now. Everybody just be safe. Please don't get together as a lodge and formally get together, because that was and when we look at the history of the COVID in Nevada, at least from that middle of November till the middle of February was when we had our biggest spike. So in retrospect, I think it was a good time to just take a pause. We did lose brothers to it. There were some brothers that died from it. It wasn't because they were meeting with Masons. It was just that they caught COVID. But I think that by and large, there's still Masonic activity going on, but it's just informal at that point.
How did you find the virtual installation? I attended one. I think it was from California. Off the top of my head. It was interesting. I thought. I don't know. I mean, definitely, I felt that the virtual. There's some really wonderful things about the virtual space, the ability to travel and visit with lodges you may not be able to get to otherwise. But there's obviously also some challenges, um, some drawbacks to it. Do you think, as we move forward, the virtual is here to stay, in the sense that even after lodges are meeting in person, do you think they will still incorporate some virtual components, whether it be virtual education or I guess, do you think over the last 18 months, the virtual world has kind of infiltrated Freemasonry, or is going to be sticking around for the future?
Because we had to adopt this virtual mentality from COVID, I don't think it's going away. I think a lot of the lodges have adopted the things they like about it. And, they're, at least the Zoom meetings that I put on in Nevada, we had, like I said, December, January, February, I think we had like 55 at the first one, and maybe we had 70 at the second one, and maybe we were up over 80 at the third one. And it was a lot of the brothers actually said that they enjoyed it because they were, number one, they couldn't get there anyway. Maybe they hadn't had a chance to attend a meeting. And so I think the virtual component is something that we should all look at, especially for some of the brothers who just can't get to a meeting physically. If there's a way to, to link them in to a meeting where the other guys are meeting in person because they want to attend, or I think for communication and education and instruction, or for a master to get his message out to his officers without having to get everybody together for an in-person meeting, I think the technology is great. And I don't see anything wrong with utilizing something that saves everybody time and money. How you might be able to do ritual virtually, I don't know. I don't know that I haven't thought that through, and I don't know that you can. But anything that would be something that would be considered open or public, I think we should take advantage of it.
What about and this is coming from the Ontario experience, and you have a Grand Lodge coming up, which we'll talk about. The idea of voting, the idea of virtual voting. It was done in Ontario this so this summer's Grand Lodge was completely virtual, including the voting.
Yeah.
I hope, I don't speak for Grand Lodge, so this is my opinion, but I hope that they maintain that, because Ontario is such a large province, and not always easily traversable. It does provide an opportunity for northern jurisdictions, brothers in Kenora, to vote at Grand Lodge, because to get from Kenora to Toronto, it's a very expensive proposition and a very time consuming one. I don't know if Nevada, it looks big on the map. I don't know how easy it is for brothers to get to Grand Lodge. I don't know if there's been any thought about adding a virtual component to the Grand Lodge communications, either last year or coming up.
Yeah. There hasn't been any discussion to do it virtually, nor to vote virtually in Nevada. It's a large state. It's about 500 miles from where I live in Reno all the way to Las Vegas. So it's a solid 7-hour drive. And so there's a lot of brothers that drive up. Most of my travel this year has been done by car. So I made a number of trips to Vegas in my car. It's just a 7-hour drive. It is what it is. You just do it. And I don't know how it is in your jurisdiction, but only the delegates have voting responsibility in Nevada. So it's not like every brother has a vote for some of that stuff. There's, the people who have votes carry their votes. So if the lodge is represented when they pick up their votes, then they would be casting them. And there is no, we don't have a method right now for those brothers to cast a vote virtually. It hasn't been discussed. It hasn't even been reviewed. I don't think we're that tech savvy. We have enough of a challenge just making sure we're recording our annual communication, quite honestly, to, if we started to introduce some kind of a virtual voting system, we just don't have enough Masons in our state to make that feasible.
Speaking again of the Grand Lodge annual communication, yours is coming up, within a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
I guess, talk to us a bit about that. Like, what type of things are planned? Obviously, there are some things that are pretty consistent for any Grand Lodge communication. But most obviously Grand Lodges will also try to create some unique experiences for both their members and guests, visitors.
Yes.
And then also, do you expect reciprocity in terms of visitation? Are you expecting to see brethren from California heading out your way? I think San Francisco and Reno are pretty close to each other.
Yeah. I can drive. My drive to San Francisco was about 4 hours from Reno for Grand Lodge. So, and we're about 2.5 hours to Sacramento. So we're close. We're in northern Nevada. We're right there. You're at the state line in about 30 miles when you get to Truckee, pretty much to Truckee, California. But as far as our Grand Lodge is concerned, we'll have a Grand Master's banquet on Sunday night, and that is open to all. It's open to everyone. And the nice thing about, at least in Reno, in Nevada, is we've got kind of built-in hospitality. So we've got these beautiful hotel casinos, and our communication is going to be at the Atlantis, which is a really nice hotel, beautiful casino, lots of other things, for the tourists to do. So it's all built in. We'll have a really nice dinner on Sunday night. Our Grand Lodge will open Monday morning, and we'll have a public portion where we'll do introductions for some of the dignitaries and some of the other bodies that, the youth groups and the Eastern Star, and some of those will be introduced at that time. And then we'll open the Grand Lodge to the Masons only after that. And we're expecting, I think, about 7 Grand Masters. Well, we're getting the senior Grand Warden from California because he lives in Nevada City, which is close. But the registrations are coming in, and we've got registrations now for Grand Masters from Oregon, Washington, Utah, Arizona, and I heard that there was a Grandmaster coming from Vermont, which is really great. So we'll have a number of dignitaries there, and there is a process for they get special treatment, like all Grandmasters do. When I went to California, they had some really nice dinners at the Fairmont for us. It was really nice. And that's one of those things we reciprocate the same way.
How, whether it be at the Grand Lodge level or at a lodge level, the importance of travel and visitation, especially as lodges are reopening and Freemasonry is reopening. Just what do you think that will mean for the craft? Putting an emphasis on travel and visitation and fraternal relations out, whether it be between lodges in different cities, or even in the same city, or up to, between grandmasters visiting each other's communications. Just how important do you think that will be, in the coming months and years as Freemasonry, starts up again?
I think it's incredibly important, and I anticipate traveling probably even more as a past grandmaster than I did as a grandmaster. And part of that was because of COVID, of course. My original calendar having been compressed, but just from 12 months to 6 months, some of the grand lodges that I intended to visit, I had to delegate one of my other grand lodge officers. So one of the senior grand warden who lives in Vegas, he went to Arizona for me, and he also went to Wyoming. I went to Idaho and California, and I had another Grand Lodge officer who represented me at the Grand Assembly for the Eastern Star. So we split up a few of the things, but I fully intend to continue to travel. Matter of fact, I intend to travel more, and I think my priority as Grand Master in Nevada was to see as all of my blue lodges, and there's about 37 of them in the state. Now, I had to combine some of those visits. So as a matter of fact, yesterday was my last Grand Master's official visit, which was down in Carson City, which is just 30 miles south of here, the capital of Nevada, Carson Lodge number 1. And that event was a joint visit with a lodge from Yarrington. And a lot of the brothers, a lot of my Grand Lodge officers came up from Las Vegas because they asked me at the beginning of the year to do stuff if I could try to conduct some OVs on a Saturday so that they could travel from Las Vegas to Reno. So they came up to one that we had in Gardnerville earlier in the year, and they came up to this one in Carson. And those were some of the best official visits that I had. We had 50, 60 brothers from all over the state. It was really, really nice. I highly encourage travel. Everywhere I go, I talk about trying to get out and meet these brothers. Part of my message has to do with appendant bodies, and that's a really great way for brothers to meet other brothers from other lodges. I'm a huge fan of travel. I think it's incredibly important.
And you, when you talk about appendant bodies, um, you're referring to, Scottish Rite, York Rite, which I think
Shrine.
is what people usually think of. But there's also uh, Eastern Star. You can support the youth groups. Um,
Yes.
uh, Visitation in terms of, whether it be, because I know, for example, oftentimes in Ontario, youth groups will have open events, where Masons are invited. When a Mason is thinking about traveling, how important is it that the brother not only think about, travel to other Blue Lodges, but think about some of those other bodies, whether it be Eastern Star, youth groups that could use, support?
For sure. And part of my message this year when I talked about the appendant bodies had to do with my own experience in my Blue Lodge and the appendant bodies that I belong to. And I would find early in my Masonic career, I got into the shrine, and I would go to a shrine meeting. I'd see a lot of guys that I knew, some from my lodge, and I met a lot of guys from other lodges. And I would see them at, let's say, the shrine. And I wouldn't necessarily see him in my Blue Lodge, and I was trying to figure out why, and it was because they had a passion for the shrine. Or when I got into the Scottish Rite, they had a passion for the Scottish Rite. And so part of my message this year to the brothers is, if you feel like you need more, or maybe your Blue Lodge, it's not that you're not going to go to your Blue Lodge, but maybe it starts to feel stale, or you want something else, to really consider any other appendant body. It could be anything that you have a passion for. And I've got our deputy grand master in Nevada is a past grand patron in the Eastern Star. He's big on Eastern Star. There's guys in my Grand Lodge line that are big on the shrine. They're past potentates, that are Grand Lodge officers in Nevada, and so they have a real passion for the children in the hospitals, or they might have a real passion for the youth groups. Are a hard one. The youth groups are a little bit more of a trick. But the same guys that like the youth groups really do a lot with all the Jobs and the Rainbow and the D-Malay. They've got a real affinity for helping the youth, and that's not for everybody, for sure. It's not. I could remember being involved in D-Malay, and it was not easy to be a chapter dad, and I had boys that were D-Malay and squires. And once they got out, it was hard to maintain for me, my experience. But I think all the youth groups, they all need support, and as well as the appendant bodies. So I usually, for me, it's where I kind of felt most comfortable and where I found the most passion for my traveling around in the appendant bodies.
When you talk about passion in a Masonic, or having a passion for some aspect of Freemasonry, whether it be Scottish Rite or York Rite or Eastern Star, or the Blue Lodge. I talked about this when I actually did my interviews with Grand Lodge candidates earlier this year. Do you think or how do I put this? Should the emphasis in Freemasonry be on, brethren having an enjoyable experience, or an experience they are passionate about, or on a productive or a fulfilling experience? The example I've used is exercise. I'm a very lazy individual. I don't particularly enjoy exercise. I wouldn't call myself passionate about it, but I recognize that there's a value to it. So even though I may not enjoy it in the moment, I recognize that it's important to be done. And I feel like with Freemasonry, sometimes lodges the focus will be on how can we make this an enjoyable experience for the membership, as opposed to how can we explain to the membership the value inherent in some of the less enjoyable aspects of the craft. Because it's not fun to pass minutes or pass bills, or it's not always enjoyable to practice your work, but it's important, and
it's very important. Yeah.
It does result in a stronger lodge. And I feel like perhaps we don't, if a brother says he's not passionate about attending lodge because he doesn't want to hear the minutes be read, which is something I always hear. I didn't enjoy information to hear the minutes. Maybe the lodges have failed to explain to him why that's valuable and why he should care about the minutes.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with being passionate about being productive either. I mean, you can be passionate about running your lodge. It doesn't have to be passion for the ritual. It could be passion. It could be passion for having a well-run lodge. And anybody who's I think desirous of maybe becoming a lodge officer, or not just sitting on the sideline, should have some passion for how their lodge is run, and they would want to know how their lodge is run. And that's why, I don't know how it is in your jurisdiction, but we almost always have a social component tied to the business meeting. So we'll have dinner before the stated meeting, and we'll always have an educational component during the stated meeting. And the discussion can get lively. It's not just reading you're reading the minutes, but then all of a sudden somebody might stand up and say, well, what about this? And then another guy will stand up and say, yeah, but what about that? And so the next thing you know, you've got a lively, interactive conversation going on in the Blue Lodge. That can be fun, and I always thought that was fun. And my passion started really with the Blue Lodge. Obviously, I was, worked my way through all the chairs, and I loved going to the Blue Lodge, and I loved being an officer, and I loved doing my job right. When I was the master of ceremonies, I read what his job duty was, and it said, you're there to welcome and greet the brothers and make everybody feel good and check in with everybody. And so I always got there early and made sure I was shaking everybody's hand and, remembering names and just trying to really welcome. And I think that enhances the lodge experience. So that makes it a little easier to swallow the time you're working on the minutes. And quite honestly, in our lodge too, and in many lodges, they will publish the minutes ahead of time so that the secretary doesn't necessarily need to read all the minutes. They can say, well, the minutes have been posted. Are there any objections, comments, changes, what have you? And if somebody had a question, you could go back and go over them. But we try to reduce the tedious part and focus on the fun part.
What about the another challenge that I'm a past master of 2 lodges, current secretary of Harmony. And one thing I heard a lot as worshipful master was um, brethren, not wanting to attend, for example, not wanting to attend a degree unless they had a piece of work to do, and they may be older brothers who have seen dozens of degrees in their life, and then they can memorize it all, and they're thinking, I don't have a part to do. Do I really want to sit and watch another degree? And trying to, and this goes back to the idea of passion, and perhaps lodges need to explain, not ever underestimating the importance or the value of attendance, even for the candidate, who he doesn't know who's doing what part or how that all the stuff works, especially at the start, right? He's just going through it. And to see, when it's all finished, or to see that a lot of people were there to see him get his degree, even if they didn't necessarily have a part to do, they were just there, right?
Right.
And at that point, it's not about that Mason and whether or not he enjoys seeing his 50th degree. It's about his responsibility to the new candidate coming in. Um, but I've always tried. I think that's another area where Freemasonry, we don't always explain well the value of somebody's presence, even if they don't have a work to do. Right? And honestly, we can fill the work. We have our ritualists, I think, but you know we can't fill your spot, your presence. Your attendance is something that we can't replace you with.
Right.
And I just have always thought that that's something too that Freemasonry really needs to emphasize. You might be bored, you might not enjoy watching the whatever number degree it is, but it matters to the candidate, right? And then therefore, by definition, it should matter to that brother.
I agree 100%. And we say, health and business and family, notwithstanding, that your Blue Lodge is a commitment. And that's always something that I try to make sure maybe a petitioner understands. It's like, look, there will be times when you just can't make it. And, health, business, family, notwithstanding, you do have an obligation to come to Blue Lodge. And I've never seen 2 degrees that were the same. So there's always something that's different. And that part I quite like. It's like an entertainment factor for me. I mean, I love to watch it, and I love to participate too if there's an opportunity for that. And there's ways that you can get other brothers involved, and I think it's really important that when a new brother is, especially maybe in the entered apprentice degree, that when he comes to light, that he sees all of these guys and they're really there for him. That's all part of the brotherhood, and I think that's very powerful. At least from my experience, that's how it was for me. And I'm like, wow, all these guys are really here, and they're here for me. And it was very powerful. And so I agree completely that that commitment to coming to lodge, it's really important. And sometimes we forget, sometimes other things take a priority, and and I think it's fun to just, I think it's great to just get refreshed on that. I think it's a message that should be shared routinely without making anybody feel bad, right? You're not, the last thing anybody wants to hear is, how come you haven't been around? Because that's not, that's not how we are. It's more like, I'm so glad you're here. We're so glad that you came back. And that's a way better way to welcome somebody than to, ask them where they've been.
I like what you said. You've never seen the same degree twice. Just for candidates, well, not for newer Masons, older Masons, for Masons who, are considering taking maybe a different part in ritual, or starting to get involved in ritual. How, and this goes to that connection of traveling and visiting other lodges, like seeing ritual work done in different lodges. How does that help with a Mason when he is doing his own ritual? How does that make for a fuller experience for him and help him develop his voice in ritual?
Well, if you see good ritual and it, we would, at least for me, I would try to emulate that. I would try to take the things that I see that I like, that I hadn't thought about, and try to incorporate them into my own ritual. I think of one of my experiences has been, there were three of us from my lodge, from Reno 13, and we went to Nevada City Lodge number 13. And because one of the brothers from Reno 13, his brother was going to be raised in that lodge. So this is in Nevada City. So three of us went to that third degree. And that was the first time I had seen that ritual in California. And I was blown away. I mean, it was the best ritual that I had ever seen. I mean, the brothers were so well practiced, and all of the parts were great. And I mean, they incorporated some things that I hadn't seen before, that just made it so unique, that when we were driving back after the degree that night, and we were talking about it in the car, and they said, man, I really love the way those I really love the way those fellow crafts did this, or they, it was just like a really cool experience. And so we were trying to figure out ways we could try to adopt some of those things into our own ritual without changing our ritual. But it could be anything from the costumes to the mannerisms, to just some little, certain little moves or whatever. But I think it's great to see other ritual in other lodges, and pick the stuff that you like and try to make your own ritual better. Because at the end of the day, it really is for the candidate, and it's for you too, right? I mean, we enjoy doing it, so you want to do it well. And if you can do something that's a little bit unique without, you're not trying to invent anything, you're just trying to make it better.
I like what you said too. Talking about it on the car ride home, how important is it for, Freemasons, if they see something in a lodge that, speak to them, however it does, or that connect with them somehow, that they take the time to talk about it with other Masons, and they take the time to discuss the things in Freemasonry that they see, that they enjoy. I can't think of the term now, but in like the military, right? Like uh, after an operation, after whatever it is, right? You debrief. There you go.
Yeah.
Like how important do you think that is, that when Freemasons are able, whether it be on the car ride or at social hour, to talk about the craft and their ideas and the things they see that they like and perhaps want to bring to their own lodge.
Sure, I think it's great, and within the confines or the restriction of your particular jurisdiction, there the job of the deputy grand lecturer is what we call them here, or the DGL for your lodge, whose responsibility it is to make sure that you're following the ritual. In other words, that that the ritual is being done a certain way according to the code. But that certainly does not mean that you can't, if you pick up on something. It could be adding music, it could be adding sound, it could be anything that just enhances the whole experience. I love adding things like that that are within the scope. We're not inventing anything, but we're just trying to make it better and make it more fun. It could be something as simple as adding more guys. I know when I was the master of my lodge, in the going through the obligation, we would line up a bunch of the brothers, and each one would give one of the obligations. So instead of the master doing every one, we had a line of guys, and each guy would step up and do one, and then the next guy would do the next, and the next guy would do the next. And so it was a different voice, a different kind of a touch. And I just thought it was really great. And that gave everybody a chance they only had to memorize one line.
I mean, that's very cool. That's awesome. And that's just, that's, this podcast, I want it to be a lot of things, but hopefully one thing it can be is kind of like that opportunity to debrief. And many Masons watching this can maybe take that, which is a very cool idea, and maybe try to apply it as they can in their own jurisdiction or their own lodge without, obviously everything goes through the Grand Lodge. But yeah, it's very, very cool. And that's just, I've had a chance to learn about a lot of really interesting ideas from different lodges and trying then to implement them.
Yeah, I find it fascinating to hear any of those things. Whatever, oh wow, we had this sound, or oh, we had this, some component, some theatrical component, that just enhanced the whole thing.
Although that does bring up perhaps one of the challenges in Freemasonry. I'm not sure in Nevada, but just in my experience, the tendency for Freemasons to become set in their ways, especially if they've been around for a long time. Not with any malicious intention, but if you've been a Mason for 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
You can have an idea, or even, you can have an idea about even your Masonic Temple, what type of events it should and shouldn't host, and what should and shouldn't be in ritual. Oftentimes that's, not based on anything from Grand Lodge, it's based purely on tradition. How do you think Freemasonry, whether it be at the lodge level or the Grand Lodge level or anywhere in between, can, combat this tendency for, perhaps the Masonic malaise to set in, or traditions become so entrenched that it becomes difficult for new ideas or new thoughts to step forward?
Yeah. Well, and isn't that the classic thing? We've always done it that way. It's, yeah, and you hear it, and I tell a story about my days in the grotto. We had a chapter in Reno, and there were two brothers that were very good friends, and one of them wanted to do something different, and the other one said, no, we've never done it that way. And it started to become bitter, and it was a conflict. And the end result was it drove the morale down of the group, and that we ended up having to surrender our charter because guys just stopped coming to the meetings because these two guys just could not agree, and they were both very strong. So the answer to your question is, how do we invoke change without changing too much, I guess, or without sacrificing the traditions that we all hold dear. And I think it's a very fine line. And I think it takes a strong leader who can build consensus about why something might need to be changed, and then to exhibit that, to try to show it. And sometimes you want to change something and it doesn't work out. Say, well, maybe that's why it hasn't been changed. But in many cases, like from my experience, some of the changes that are good actually will become then the new tradition.
And I think the question of consensus, I think is a good place to, a good kind of place to end this podcast, with the question of how can Freemasons, again, if it's at the lodge level or the Grand Lodge level or the district level, do you have districts in Nevada?
We have districts, but they don't have their own deputies.
Okay.
We have districts, but we're not large enough to have separate guys for that.
How does in general, between jurisdictions, how does Freemasonry and Freemasons, you think, go about building consensus, if there is, disagreement? Obviously, you have Grand Lodge coming up. That's an example of, democracy and building consensus that way. And even, just more with the general climate of the world today, do you think, which is unfortunately, I've seen it here, I don't know, it's like in Nevada, we're not allowed to talk politics or religion in lodge, but
Right.
on social media, there are many Masons who do, and I've seen that sow some discord.
Oh,
How did
imagine.
how did yeah how do you think Freemasonry can go about trying to, rebuild a consensus or just maintain consensus in, perhaps, I would argue, it's pretty contentious times in
Yeah.
2021?
Well, I think from my perspective, the consensus is built with the goal in mind. In other words, we all have to agree what we're trying to accomplish before we can begin to build consensus. So if we say that our ultimate goal is to do this, and we agree that that's what we want to do, then we have to agree on how we're going to get there. And everybody has an opinion, and everybody's opinion is valid, but coming to consensus on the ultimate goal, really, again, from my perspective, is we want to solve this. How do we get there? Rather than saying we want to do this without really thinking about what the end is in mind. So from my, when I'm trying to build consensus, I try to talk a lot about what my experience has been and making sure that everybody's on board. Is this what we really want to do? If the answer is yes, then how are we going to get there? And that seems to bring everybody together.
I like that. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that a lot of times, and this can, I think, a challenge in leadership in general is, um, a leader will lay out a plan to do something, but won't necessarily first take the time to, actually define what it is or why it is they wanted to get there, or what the actual end goal is. And if everybody has different ideas about what the right end goal is, it can be very hard to build consensus on any type of plan.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people do want to know why. And some people don't understand, why do you want to know why? We're doing it because I say we're going to do it, which is, it rarely works out.
That, as from personal
Yeah.
experience, as somebody who tried that approach, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, is that where things like, I mean, is that just, showing the value of regular communication, surveys, again, whether it be at the lodge level, masters communicating with the lodge, or whether it be at the Grand Lodge level, just, maintaining contact through Zoom meetings, through
Sure.
visitation.
Yeah. There probably is such a thing as too much communication, but I think it's rare. I think more communication is way better than less, especially for people who want to know why. That that the reinforcing what we're trying to do is always a good idea, and there could be little bits of communication. I tried to send out like a weekly kind of an email to the Grand Lodge officers with an update on the events that were coming up and what was the dress code. It was a simple thing, but I think it was appreciated because it was a reminder that these were the things that were coming, instead of all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I got an email yesterday that there's a meeting tomorrow. Well, you've actually been notified, a number of times, just by way of regular communication. I always felt that was really good for me because, with Masonry, we've got a lot of stuff going on. And I think the better we communicate about whatever it is, the better outcome we're going to have.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm sure you're right that there is you can't communicate too much, but I'd be hard pressed to. I think there's a pretty high threshold. You're probably safer to err on the side of too much communication than not enough, because there's a comfort in that communication. Knowing that there's going to be another communication from your Grand Lodge, from the Grand Master, right?
Yeah.
Even if I suspect it's a bit like teenagers rolling their eyes at their parents. Like, even if you might roll your eyes, the truth is you're happy that they're communicating with you, because you're happy they're there, and that means you can rely on them if you need help with anything in life.
I agree 100%.
Have you seen any, when we're talking about trying to define goals, define what we want from Freemasonry, have you seen any lodges, or has Nevada looked at anything like membership surveys? I know our Scottish Rite did a survey of its membership here in the Windsor Valley. Have you seen anything like that at a lodge level or Grand Lodge level?
I have not. The closest thing to an informal survey that I took was probably during those Zoom calls, where and let's just say there were 60 brothers on the Zoom call, and I can see all their faces on Zoom, and they can see mine, and I would ask, how's everything going? Does anybody need help with anything? Does anybody want to say something about anything? And so it would be an informal kind of a survey that way, not anything formal to fill out, but just checking in to check in on the brothers that way, to make sure everybody was doing okay. And it was not uncommon for somebody to say, "Hey, Grand Master, I've got this question or challenge. What about this?" Or "We're doing great. Hey, thanks. We're doing good here, doing good there." Those things, I think, it's probably the closest we came to any kind of a formal survey. Of course, in our jurisdiction, we're small, so word travels fast if something's not going well.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I mentioned Scottish Rite in our valley, and actually, I just received a link, come to think of it, from Worship Brother Campbell. He is with the Lodge of Research in Kentucky. And it looks like he's doing a survey of Masons, asking, why they got into Freemasonry, and what they think the purpose of Freemasonry is, and what they think that the challenges are. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head, but that might be an interesting avenue, as you talked about, right? To build consensus is having some type of survey. This is for any even at the lodge level, the worshipful master, surveying the membership to figure out, like, okay, what is it you want from this lodge? What is it you want from me as worshipful master? What is it you want from your Grand Lodge, type of thing. I'm just trying to think, because I don't know of any Grand Lodges that have performed a survey of its membership off the top of my head. I think if you're out there, leave a comment. I'd love to see the results of it.
Sure, that would be really interesting information. And it's just like any other market research that you might do, whether you're running a business or you want to know more about your customers. If you think about it that way, as from the Masonic level, hey, like you said, what is it that you want, or is there something that's missing? Though it's a little bit harder to answer those questions than it is to just check yes, no, or rate 1 to 10 about your experience. But I think some combination of those things, the more free form I think some of the answers are, is depending on who you're soliciting, whether you're researching your own brothers or whether you're researching the public's opinion of you, which are going to be two different things.
And that's
I love research. I love those kinds of things. I like the topic.
and that's a very interesting point too, right? When you're talking about the audience for your survey, are you surveying Masons to, especially in a jurisdiction where maybe you have attendance issues, attendance dropping, you survey your membership, or if the issue is not, number of applications are dropping, do you survey the general public, which would be more challenging because how do you get that info? But do you, try to find, all the men within, 10 block radius of a Masonic temple, and just what do you know about, do you know what this building is? Do you know what the Masons are? What are your views
Yeah.
on the Masons? Yeah, it's trying to define that audience would be important too. You know, I'm assuming because you probably weighted by age and stuff, right? I'm assuming, people 50 and above would have different answers to some of these questions than people who are 20 to 30, I'm
Sure.
guessing you'd see a lot of different answers based on age and other demographics.
And probably a lot of people that just don't know. I think that's a common thing too. They see things and they don't know what it is. And we had one year we had an open house. The Grand Master that year wanted all of the lodges to conduct an open house on a certain day, and it was planned on the Masonic calendar. All of the lodges opened to the public in a form of an open house, all on the same day, and it was very successful in some areas. And people would say, "Oh my gosh, I walk by this building all the time, and I had no idea what was inside." So it was positive. And I think more of that probably is. I can't see a downside to it.
And I agree completely. Absolutely. Yeah, we had an open house here in Windsor too, and same thing. People had visited this temple for weddings, for special events, but they had no idea what Masonic Temple meant. They just thought of it as like a meeting hall, as opposed to a fraternity. You said people don't know. I wonder how many answers, if from the Masonic side, if Masons were being honest, if you asked them what do you want from Freemasonry, how many would respond with "I don't know"? I wonder, because I do sometimes get the sense when you're talking to some Masons who, haven't attended for a while, they actually don't know what they want out of, they may have joined because of family connections or because they wanted, they may not necessarily know why they joined, which is an interesting on
Yeah,
that side of it. I wonder
it
how
would
many would
be
say that.
interesting. Yeah, for them to find out, to get an honest answer, and especially from the brothers that you may not see. The
Yeah.
ones. Yeah, why did you join, or why did you stop coming? It might be the
Yeah.
same answer.
Yeah, I do suspect you get some of them would be, I don't necessarily, or even what do you want from the craft? They may say they don't know, which would be interesting data in and of itself. I know this is a bit of a tangent. If any Grand Lodges or lodges have done it, leave a comment. You
Well,
don't even have to
the,
get.
the Scottish Rite, the Southern jurisdiction, and the Shrine, they have their campaign out. They're not just a man of Mason. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they actually did gather a lot of data as part of this project that they're working on. So, and I think it's been published.
Was the data? I've seen a presentation on that, but that I could be wrong. But that data wasn't motivation based. I could be wrong, and if you're
I
leave a
think it had to
comment.
do with the clicks and the likes and the people who expressed
Yeah,
interest. But there was some demographic, I think, to it as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think a lot of it, from what I recall, was percentage of how many for every 100 men that expressed an interest in joining, how many were responded to, how quickly were they responded to, um, were they responded to within 3 months, 6 months, how many never got a call back. I saw that data, and I saw the like impression versus engagement, which you see on social media. How many impressions did this receive versus how many people clicked on it. Um, but I don't know if I saw any data in terms of like, okay, why did an individual why did one individual scroll past it and just and made an impression, but he didn't engage with it, versus why did another individual actually take the time to engage with it?
Right.
What is it about Freemasonry that that individual found interesting? And then on the other side of it, why did why is it that when an app why is it that when somebody contacted one lodge and said, I'm interested in joining, he never got a response? But when he contacted another lodge, he got a response. What is it about what's happening in those lodges that is either encouraging or discouraging, responding efficiently to requests for information? I'm not sure if that data was part of what I saw. I don't think it was. I think it was
I don't think it was. But
clicks.
I think they're, maybe I'm mistaken, that you had to complete. I think they were asking about your age or something.
I
Um,
saw some demographic info on there. Yeah,
yeah,
from what I recall, this was a long time ago. Again, I think the demographic info was somewhat in line with what you'd expect.
yeah,
Younger, more engagement online, more clicks as opposed to older, just impressions. So you saw the demographic information, but why that 25-year-old wants to join, why he clicked. I don't know if we saw that. And then by the same token, why a lodge did or did not respond.
right. And that's
Um,
probably an organizational thing. I know in Nevada, we sort the leads, so to speak, based on where the person might live. And then, but all of our lodges had an opportunity to opt in to participate in the social media campaign that we were doing in Nevada. And it's been very successful for the lodges who actively engaged. In other words, they followed up on the leads more than once. And those lodges we're seeing now are um, gathering a number of petitions. So their job now is to kind of, the investigative part becomes even more important.
Absolutely, right. That's a very important part. But I'm glad to hear that. Do you think, based on that, the increasing in petitions, do you see coming out of this Freemasonry growing in Nevada?
I think we are, yeah. At least in my travels this last year, um, all of the lodges that I went to had petitions, were reading petitions, and were actively balloting. So that was positive. There were very few lodges that I went to where the master asked if there were petitions, and the answer was no. It was almost always yes. And we were doing a lot of balloting, which is
Very
great.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I feel positive about it.
That's great to hear, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with the hard work of lodges and the hard work of Grand Lodge. So well done to you, most worshipful sir. It's great to
Appreciate
hear.
that, Cameron. Yeah. Thank you.
Um, and with that, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Reno, Nevada. Like I said, I've never had the chance to visit any lodges in the state of Nevada, but I would very much love to one day. And hopefully I can make it to Reno or Las Vegas or anywhere in between, because
Yeah, you would always be welcome. Give us a little heads up. Call me. You know how to reach me. Contact me directly if you want to come to Reno. If you want to go to Vegas, I've got all the guys down there. We'll get you right. Hooked right in with visiting one of the lodges. There's some really nice lodges down there too, and they have a lot of events. They're very active.
awesome.
Love to
I
have.
will make
Yeah.
I'll make a point of it for sure. I'm vaccinated. The border's reopening. It seems like there'll be more and more travel in my future, with the podcast, and just because I love Freemasonry, so
Yeah.
the chance to
You and
travel.
you looked at the podcast the guys from Vegas 32 were doing, the one that's
Yeah, Mason or not.
yeah. So that's they've got their little studio. They would love to have you come in and talk about what you do in your podcast and what they do there. That'd be kind of cool.
That'd be terrific. I'd love to do that for sure. It's I'm subscribed to it. I'll leave a link to it actually in the description to this video, or up in the corner. I never know which corner it's at.
All right.
In one of these corners, there'll be a link. It's a great, it's out of Nevada. It's a great podcast. Give them a like, give them a subscribe,
Yeah,
all
and it
that
should
good
go
jazz.
both ways. Yeah, it would be, I think hooking up your podcast with theirs would be great. A lot of synergy there.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a few floating around, but I've seen that one. Which one did I see most recently? Memento Mori, I think it was. I think. Anyways, yeah, it's a terrific podcast. Mason or not, check it out. And most worshipful sir, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Cameron. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it.